Thank you. This is the Housing and Community Welfare meeting. All members are in attendance. Juan just had to leave for a bit.
Okay.
So I'm just going to be acting chair until he comes back. So first on the agenda is approval of the agenda, which is focused on the opioid epidemic. Do I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved, Madam Chair.
And I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Then second on the agenda is the approval of our last meeting and its minutes. That was an eventful meeting. Yeah. Do I have a motion to accept the meeting minutes prepared by Takia?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. I think we can start. We have all of our public safety leaders here. Thank you very much for spending the evening with us. I think we can start the agenda item, which I understand is discussing the opioid epidemic. I just have it as an ID action. I don't know who between you was going to present first. There he is.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My apologies for that. My
no
computer.
Problem. We're just starting on the subject now. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss before that, Juan?
No. I think just right in order with what you were saying, just opening up the floor to the public safety members. Just to, again, we're having just general discussion as it relates to the opioid epidemic, trying to put together some solutions, ideas, and just a better understanding for the council and the public. So I'll turn it over to the public safety team.
So I'll go ahead and start, and I sent over a PowerPoint. Julian, if you could put that PowerPoint up.
Chief, can you also send me that PowerPoint, please?
Sure, I'll send it to you. So it says Office of Emergency Management. This is a PowerPoint that I did previous and all, but this discussion tonight is the public safety team. So it's fire, it's the Office of Emergency Management, and it's police department. Again, next slide, please. So what I have, this chart that you see here is a diagram of the organizational structure of the Annapolis Opioid Intervention Team. It shows each program area and how they relate to other essential components in finding solutions to the substance use disorder crisis. So if you start at the top, Dr. Kalyana Raman is at the top. He has the ultimate responsibility for substance use disorder in the county and the city. And if you go right underneath, this is the players, the main players: emergency management, police department, fire department, and the mayor's office in no particular order. All of us have equal status. And the city manager gives us guidance, public safety chair gives us guidance. What I want you guys to pay attention to is the next line down in the light green: the prevention, the enforcement, the harm reduction, the treatment, and the quality of life. These are the substance use disorder groups, and these are the programs. So I'll take each one of these sections one by one, and I'll be joined by comments from the police chief, the major, and the fire chief as well. So next slide. So highlighted here is the prevention. And we'll talk about that for a minute. So prevention consists of the NAM related programs, NAPTOWN anti-dope movement programs, Your Life Matters from out of the fire department, ODFREE, which is out of the Office of Emergency Management, and the police department's intervention and education program. And we'll talk a little bit about the med return box. Next slide, please. So the NAPTOWN antidote program comes out of the mayor's office again. This initiative from the mayor's office is designed to raise awareness about harm reduction and substance use treatment resources, particularly in the Black community. So it's run by TOLA, and you can see some of their activities. They're pretty active. They do a pretty good job. Next slide, please. And I'll turn this over to Chief O'Malley to talk about Your Life Matters. Chief.
So this program here is basically the Narcan Leave Behind training, where we go out and train individuals on the use of Narcan and sorry about that, and how they can administer it if a person is to overdose. It also involves the hands-only CPR, because if you have somebody that's not breathing, you have to keep their heart beating even as you're giving the Narcan. We also give out some drug deactivation kits for the prescription drugs that people have in their homes that they have not disposed of. They can actually use these kits, put their drugs in those kits, they activate it with some water, and it's safe to just throw away at that point, so it's not harmful to the environment. And then, as you know, we have the Safe Stations program, where anybody that's seeking treatment can come to a firehouse or a police station, tell us that they're in need of help, and we will get crisis management involved with them at that point. We have recently, through grant funding that Office of Emergency Management was able to secure for us, and I believe OAM and the police department, but for us, we had some grant money that was able to allow us to continue this Your Life Matters program. Because of the increase we're seeing, we're doing pop-up camps now. So they're going out to the communities and actually just setting up a tent and walking around and talking to individuals in the communities to get them involved in this. As Alderman Gay knows, we were there, I believe it wasn't this past weekend, it may have been the weekend before that, but we were in the Eastport community, actually set up a tent, walked around in the communities of Harbor House and Eastport Terrace, talked to people on President Street, and actually just engage them, talk to them about the crisis that's going on, and actually taught them on how to use the Narcan. The interesting thing is, just over the last few weeks, we've given out at least 97 kits, Narcan kits. But right after we did the one in the Eastport community, within 2 days, there was a double overdose that somebody we taught actually gave Narcan, and that person was able to survive. So the program's out there. Obviously, if you need them for your wards, let us know. But currently, we're going to continue to go out, just set up in the areas and try to talk to the community to get more people involved in it. Thanks.
So if you go to the next slide is ODFREE. And basically, this is the program out of the Office of Emergency Management. So we have the dashboard where we actually keep the data on what's going on. And the data that you see, the dashboard that you see, snapshot is a snapshot of what's going on today. We've had 44 overdoses since January 1. We've had 4 fatal overdoses and 7 pending. What that means is that we strongly suspect, and it usually is, that they died of an overdose of some type of substance. And we're waiting for a disposition from the medical examiner. So that soon, that 7 pending will add that 4, and it'll be 11. So this dashboard is available to the public, the community, the council, anybody. It's real easy to use, and you can keep up on the information. So,
Director Simmons?
Sure.
I'm sorry, I just had a quick question. 2 questions, actually. One is, Rick Surdell, is it new staff member?
I'll get to him in a second.
Okay. And then when it comes back that you actually get the report from like a fatal overdose, does it say what the specific drug was that contributed to the overdose, or are you putting that into categories just based off of, knowledge of the community?
They come back with some information on what actually caused the fatal. Yes. So what we do, and I'll get into this a little bit later, is that when we meet every other month, we look at the fatals that we've had in the last 60 days, and we actually talk about those fatals. We actually review those fatals and see if we can learn anything that we can apply to keep it from happening. But getting back to what the Office of Emergency Management does is that we put fentanyl strips in the community. In the bottom left hand, it's what fentanyl strips look like. They can use that to test their drugs to see if it has fentanyl in it. If it does have fentanyl in it, what we're hoping is that they choose a different route. Instead of injecting, maybe they sniff it, or they will use it slower and not faster, or they would use it in the presence of somebody with Narcan. So it's been our dealing that they don't get rid of it. They don't say it's fentanyl in it, I got to get rid of this. No, they may do something different as to not kill themselves. We also we do Narcan training and distribution. And then ODFREE Annapolis has a myriad of resources that folks, if they need some help and they need some direction, they can go to ODFREE. So to answer your question, Alderman, Rick Sardell is paid for. He's paid for up until July 1st. He's actually working on this. He's writing grants. He's trying to find money. And he's kind of working on the side to make sure that we keep this program vibrant and going. Next slide, please. And this is the APD's intervention and prevention program. And did somebody want to check in from APD? Basically, it does the two things on the screen. I know the chief is driving, and I don't know if Major Branford is still on. But basically, this is a neat program because they have a licensed clinical professional counselor with the officers, and they connect with the people after they've had overdoses to see if they need some resources, if they can help them find resources, if they can help their families. And they have a youth drug prevention program component with it too. So this is pretty cool. So they hit the very, very young. And then after one comes back from an overdose, they actually take the professional counselor and team them up with an officer and all. And this kind of creates a non-arrest pathway to treatment and recovery. And if the chief or Major want to comment more on this program, certainly you have the floor.
Yeah, I heard you say part of, you talking about the Anne Arundel County's program with our partnership with Anne Arundel County?
No. This is your program, Chief, through the Annapolis Opioid Intervention Team.
Oh, Annapolis. Okay, yeah. I'm sorry, I only heard part of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I actually filled them in on it, Chief, but I was telling them that this is one of our pride and joy programs because you guys actually have the licensed clinician with your folks, and you're trying to find a non-arrest pathway to getting people to treatment and recovery.
That's correct. That's 100% correct.
Okay.
Is the licensed clinical professional counselor a city employee, or are they contracted services?
Contractual.
Contractual. They actually is in Anne Arundel County. They're not housed right in the city, okay. But we actually pay for that.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful.
So next slide, please. Next slide. So this is at the police station. If the chief or the major want to say something about this, I'll defer to them.
No, but it's the med return boxes, so it's kind of self-explanatory that people can come not just with any opioids, but even prescription drugs, that they can turn them into these particular boxes. I know we have a couple of days coming up, 2 days. One, the city is hosting, and the other one, there's a national drug turn-in day. I think that's on the 24th. We'll be out advertising to turn those drugs in. So those are made available for people who may come across drugs, not just illegal drugs, but prescription drugs too, that also contribute to some overdoses.
Thank you, Major. Next slide, please.
Could I just ask, Major, for the drop off the meds, will you be sending something to us so that we can send to our constituents just for, these are like expired prescriptions and stuff?
Yes, we're gonna make that happen.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, Stan, why don't we have that placed on the website?
Not certain, but I will check.
Okay, yeah, it should be on the website too, Alderwoman.
Okay, thanks.
On,
and it may be, I don't know, it may be. So I'll double check and ensure and get that out to you.
Okay, thanks, Major.
on drug take back day, or those drop boxes in the city police station, I know kind of the intent is for prescription medication, but do we accept, like, if someone has illicit narcotics, if they are trying to get them out of the house, would we just accept it, no question asked?
Yes, so they can drop it right into that box, no question asked.
Okay.
Okay, so we talked about prevention, and we're certainly entertain any questions at the end, or you can ask questions as we go along. But the next program area is an enforcement, and that's strictly APD. And these are efforts that go directly to get illegal substances out of the community and the purveyors or the sellers of these drugs off our streets. And I'll let APD talk about what they can talk about with this.
Right. But usually what happens, and all officers are instructed, and the actual investigation for a overdose would fall into the criminal investigation division. But the initial investigation, what officers are instructed to do when they go to a scene where there's an overdose, what they're looking for is any evidence, a residue that's left over, any paraphernalia, that stuff is to be collected. If there's phones on the scene, we want to get those phones. Reason being, because we get a trace analysis from the drugs that's left behind. We can match those traces up to other area in the city in hopes of trying to get a pattern where some deadly substance is going to be. The phones actually get dumped into our federal partners' national database. They keep a database for the state of Maryland. And what we look for, if we have several overdoses throughout the year, we look for frequent numbers that possibly those who are using what's called the dealer. And we can kind of pinpoint where some of these substances are coming from. We can kind of pinpoint who's selling it. We just increased 2 additional detectives to be assigned to our drug enforcement unit. And they're specifically tasked now looking for and putting together those connections. So those 7 pending overdoses that you saw for the chemical analysis, we just instructed Sergeant Parker to give it the medical examiner's office. We're looking for the analysis on those so we can try to triangulate where this stuff is coming at and doing trace analysis on what's left behind and where these phone numbers are frequently calling.
Next slide, please.
I just have a quick question on that. My apologies. I don't know, it won't charge until I'm on my phone now. The actual follow-up and pinpointing and connecting. Are you then able to, based off of the text evidence, is that enough to, actually prosecute somebody for their involvement in, providing deadly drugs to somebody?
No, so not just a single occurrence, right? So you have to set a pattern, and we actually have a task force with the federal government, and they work a region. Once we establish a pattern and we can link that pattern to a conspiracy, then they're charged. It's kind of hard to do on a singular charge, but you got to be able to establish that pattern to see where this stuff is going to and what it's linked to.
If I may, do we have a general idea on where most of our narcotics are coming in from?
No, right now, I would imagine, I can't tell you for certain, that the last couple arrests that we made, the people that we made in those drug arrests had connection to Baltimore and Glen Burnie and Brooklyn. So mainly you would see drugs coming from those areas. That's where most of the dealers are coming from that's going to be selling: Baltimore, Brooklyn, and Glen Burnie. In fact, the last homicide that we had, the gun that was involved in that was involved in a homicide in Baltimore about 6 days ago. So we know that those things are occurring, and there's a connection between those areas.
Oh, absolutely. Just so you know, Alderman Chandelmeyer, I guess you probably read in the papers anyway. In addition to everything that Major Branford just stated, it was interesting. We got 44.4 pounds of cocaine, I think. Was it cocaine, Stan?
I think it was heroin.
Heroin, it was heroin. 44.4 pounds of heroin. It was a joint effort between the HIDA, the U.S. Coast Guard, the Department of Natural Resources. We had a detective, Gerard Williams, as a part of the task force. The Drug Enforcement Administration, they got 4.4 pounds of heroin coming in, several kilos, street value of $1 million, headed towards Annapolis. Coming in right down the Chesapeake Bay, headed for Annapolis, and it was seized. The boat and the heroin was seized a couple of weeks ago. This is about 3 weeks ago. So we do know that drugs are getting in to the city of Annapolis, also wholesale. Now, we don't believe that all that was going on in the streets of Annapolis. As Major Bradford said, probably a lot of it was going to go to various communities in Anne Arundel County and Baltimore City, maybe even a little bit of Howard County too. Along 29 in Howard County that borders Anne Arundel County, some of the same players are running through all three jurisdictions.
But it's safe to say that Baltimore, being like the primary, is the primary distribution hub. Like narcotics traditionally will go into Baltimore City and then kind of spread out into the suburban communities or wholesale distribution.
I think that's safe.
Or retail distribution, I guess.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I would agree with that too. That's just a professional opinion. I would agree too.
Was that where that ship was headed?
The ship was heading for Annapolis, if I'm not
The ship was heading for Annapolis, yeah. The ship was heading.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, that probably would have ended up on down Dock Street. Yeah, it was headed right for the city, right downtown. But U.S. Coast Guard intercepted it. The investigation's still ongoing. That's like I said, the U.S. Coast Guard, the DNR. It was us. Well, it was a member of our the Annapolis APD was on the task force. It was the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration. It was a federal seizure. But yes, ma'am, it was headed towards us, right towards the city of Annapolis.
Yeah, that was huge.
So, so in my opinion, the greatest impact on deterring drugs in the city of Annapolis will be the community working with and informing our police department on the drug activity on the street, and police having the staff in place to respond immediately. I think that's the one factor out of all of this. They say, what one thing can you do is that the police, the community working directly with the police, not being afraid to tell the police the activity and the movement of the drug guys on the street, and the police just having the staff to actually respond to that immediately. I think that'll have a big effect on curtailing drugs. Next slide.
I agree.
Next slide, please. Move to the next slide. All right, so let's take another program group, and that's harm reduction. Harm reduction are policies and programs that aim to minimize the negative impacts associated with drug use. Harm reduction acts as a bridge to other services. So next slide, please. So we do have folks on the street that are paid by grant money, and they distribute fentanyl strips. They're trained on Narcan distribution and training to train other people, and they become harm reduction advocates. So we have folks on the street who actually.
Director Simmons?
Yes, sir.
Am I correct in reading that I want to make sure this is right. Your total budget is less than $1 million, like altogether, office, operating, everything is.
It's not even anywhere near $1 million.
Okay, so I'm reading this right. This is about 6 and some change.
Well, okay. I guess we're gonna get into that tomorrow.
Well, yeah.
But we deal mostly with grants. We don't have the budget. We don't have the funding. So we have to be very, very aggressive in trying to find grants. So the 4 programs that you heard in prevention, to run them a year is a little less than $100,000, right? We just secured enough grant funding to get them back up and running for half a year. At July 1, all that money goes away. So we're applying for a grant about $100,000. It has to be in by April 30th. I've already talked to Dr. Kalyana Raman. I got $35,000 coming from him. So if I don't get the grant, that $35,000 will push those programs along maybe for another 5 or 6 months. But then I got to find other money. And the fire chief and the police chief agreed that in my enhancements, I would put in an enhancement to keep these programs running. So the enhancement for these programs fall under my budget. But that was an agreement I had with the police chief and the fire chief that I would go forth with that enhancement for all of our programs. So we do have people out there, and Alderman Gay, remember when you had a cry for help about a week and a half ago, and I emailed you back. I said we had Narcan coming into the area. It was this program. And I told them to flood this area with Narcan.
And to the points that both you and Chief Romali have made, it's definitely out there. I went with Officer Smikle today, and we dropped off more Narcan and fentanyl strips as well in Eastport. And so people are using it. It's being used. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Bad because if they're using the Narcan, it means that people are also using drugs a lot more often, but it's definitely being used.
Next slide, please. AA Power is a behavioral health program within the Anne Arundel County Health Department. They're very aggressive. They do a lot of work, good work in Annapolis, in Ward 6 and Ward 4. Sometimes when we get overwhelmed with overdoses and fatals and all, we talk to AA Power to kind of flood the area, to kind of give out resources. And a lot of them being ex-addicts, they can relate to the folks, and they help them with resources and other things. So one of the main things that they do is, not the main thing, it's one of many things that they do, is a needle exchange program, so they could keep the rate of HIV and hepatitis infections down among IV drug users. So that's kind of a recent program. I think that program might be less than a year old. Next slide, please. So we're moving from harm reduction over to treatment. And this is an important part of what we're doing here too.
Director Simmons, I just need to ask, for harm reduction, do we have a policy about what happened recently in certain communities, the distribution of the pipes? The crack cocaine pipes. So sometimes it's not what you do, it's how you do it. I was telling the story before we got on board about the fentanyl strips. The fentanyl strips have been on the street about 3 years ago. And back then, Fran Phillips was the health officer. And she asked me, would I take this on? I thought it was a good idea. We just didn't put it on the street. What we did is we did the research. There were some studies out of Boston, Rhode Island, in San Francisco. There was a Hopkins doctor that swore by it. We talked to the Hopkins doctor, talked it over with the mayor. We did a press conference of sorts saying that, hey, this is a way that we can curtail fatal overdoses. And then we kind of eased it out there. We got a reaction, and then we pushed it out there all the way. I remember that. You really treaded carefully with that. I remember that.
So I think, with the crack pipes, I applaud the health department from backing back and rebooting and engaging the community. So it's a matter of what the community will accept and what they want in their community. So I'm glad that they're having that dialogue. They're still having that dialogue, and they'll come to some sort of agreement at some point. But a lot of times it's not what you do, it's how you do it.
Good point. Thank you.
Next slide, please. So you got part of treatment is crisis response system. They support Chief O'Malley in the safe stations. Everybody's familiar with Jen Corbin and Steve Thomas. And I'll let the police department, if they want to add to them, because I know the police department pays them a pretty penny to help us in Annapolis. So if you want to add anything about crisis response, Chief Jackson or Major Branford.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we what do we pay? I'm staying about $100,000 a year.
We're paying $100,000 a year. That's what the licensed clinician is.
Right, exactly. So it is a service that we pay for. We try to utilize it as much as we can. And every time we speak publicly about it, I let them know that because we don't have a county health department, obviously, it's not a freebie. We do partner with them in every sense of the word, as Chief Simmons just stated. We pay them about $100,000 a year for their services. But I think it's worth it. It's been beneficial. I think Jen Corbin and Steve Thomas do an excellent job. We have Nikki Vaden as the liaison between the Annapolis Police Department, Sergeant Nikki Vaden, and the Anne Arundel County. But what Stan and I had discussed, and it was brought to me by Lieutenant Klondis and Major Branford, who's on the call, the possibility of instead of Nikki Vaden being the liaison, the possibility we're toying with it, putting it in patrol because, and I've always argued that's where it should be, the supervision and patrol manager, because that's where the rubber meet the roads. We want to take it as far down to the first responders as practical, and it's no more practical than having patrol because those are the ones that it start with anyway. The men and women in the Annapolis PD who encounters the people in crisis the most. So you have anything to add to that, Stan?
Yeah, so right now, Nikki Vaden, she's there running that, but we think that we can get a better response with it being in patrol. When you start talking about drug addiction, there is some element of mental health that's tied to that. Right now, we have about 25 officers in patrol that's been CIT certified. And I think we have one dispatcher who's CIT certified also. But we're looking to streamline it because I think we're missing a few things when it comes to responding to some of this stuff. And by us being the first responders rather than getting a referral, I think it will work out a lot better. We just got to work out the kinks and be able to get the program up and running the way it should.
Okay, if you go to the next slide.
Just really quickly, I just want to bring up a point on this. Because last year in the budget, I requested an amendment to remove this financing because I do think it's a lot of money. And while I think that the partnership is valuable, I think it would serve us well to go in a different direction. So I plan to do the same thing again this year. And so I will talk with you all to just really lay out what I think would be a good plan in regards to having this in-house. I think it makes a significant difference. We keep the data ourselves. We're able to, just really build those relationships that I think is critical. And following up on the calls too is so important. I actually just was talking with some members of the community Saturday, and they were saying that an incident happened and crisis response wasn't following up. And so that has to happen. And so we'll talk, more in the budget, but definitely on this point, I just wanted to bring that up.
Noted.
Go ahead, Major.
No, I said that was noted.
And yeah, it's noted, Alderman, and I'm anxious to hear your plan. I'm always open, but I will say that these two folks that you see on the screen has been traveling nationally because this program is so highly rated, and they're considered cutting edge, and this program is considered cutting edge. So, but I'm interested in hearing what you have to offer, sir. And
I'm not knocking them. I know they worked well on the phone with me. I've actually met Lieutenant Thomas. Is crazy. One of my old principals who I'm really good friends with, they're really close friends. And so I've seen, in personal capacity. I just think that we need to be able to, maybe if we could, I said before, maybe we should codify it. Maybe it needs to be added to the police act. But every single time a shooting or an overdose happens, crisis response should be called. It's just like period. So we can talk about that.
Sure. Next slide, please. So we're back to safe stations, which is treatment. One of the first steps into treatment. I'll defer back to Chief O'Malley if he has anything to add.
I think we covered it in my earlier comments, and most people are aware of the Safe Stations program. But I would reiterate that we work with that mobile crisis team who are state of the art, and they work with these individuals every day that we call them. So we're here, we can help, and we can get things facilitated. But we are, as the fire department, we're still the responders, so we're the ones responding to try to keep these people alive.
Chief O'Malley, I know that the safe stations, when they were first started, had a bit of a funding inadequacy. Has that issue been addressed?
So that part of what Alderman Gay is talking about, and the city actually paying to help fund that mobile crisis team, has addressed it up to this point. So yes.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Schandelmeyer, they have what's called, I think it's called a block grant in the health department. And out of that block grant, two major fundings go out. One is the $35,000 to the city of Annapolis to boost our programs. And the other one is to fund two crisis response, one crisis response team, which is 2 people. So they do get a considerable amount of grant funding.
Excellent.
So next slide, please. So we winding it down to quality of life. So we're still fiddling with this. So if, prevention, kind of keep them away, enforcement, try to get everything out of the street, harm reduction, trying to get you a step to treatment, and then treatment happens. So what happens after they go to treatment? How do they turn their life around? How do they get a good start? How do they re-engage with their families? Because if you're in a game for 15 years using heroin, you got to get reacquainted with your family again. How do you do a household budget now and all that? So we have this category called quality of life. And the biggest factor of making this quality of life work is the reentry program from APD. in that the first bubble up here is employment and employment training. And that has worked wonders since that program has came into the city of Annapolis. So when we talk about quality of life and you're leaving treatment and you're trying to get your life back together, this is a place that we can send them. So we're looking at areas and we're talking with Aaron Lee about how do we get them financial literacy? How do you do a household budget? How do you manage your finances? Mentoring and support. You know, you need a life coach when you have feelings like you might fall back. So you have to have that person that does mentoring and support. And if you have a minor criminal record, how do we get that expunged so you can get a decent job? Mm-hmm. So, and APD's, again, reentry program, and just recognizing the city of Annapolis as a recovery supportive city. They support you in your sobriety. So basically, this is the Annapolis Opioid Intervention Team. We don't only deal with opioids, we deal with all kinds of substances. We call it Opioid Intervention Team because to get the state money, you have to be an OIT. So we say Opioid Intervention Team. But if you're struggling with other type of substance use disorders, alcohol, PCP, or any, you know, we're dealing with you within this framework. Can you, next slide, please. Next slide. So this is from ODFREE. If you look up, we've had a total of 44 overdoses. How do I know that? I don't know that, because there's many times somebody has an overdose, Narcan's in the street, they give them Narcan, they get up and walk away. That's an uncounted overdose. So ones that I can count are 44, and we have 4 fatals with 7 pending. So you might as well say we've had 11 fatals. So where are these overdoses happening? We've had 5 in Ward 1, 2 in Ward 2, 6 in Ward 3, 8 in Ward 4, one of our second highest, 1 in Ward 5, 9 in Ward 6, our highest, 5 in Ward 7, and again, tied for second is Ward 8. So that's the overdoses by wards. Next slide. So who's it affecting? African Americans primarily. 25 instances of overdoses, 18 white, one Hispanic, no Asian, and no unknown. Gender, primarily male, 32 males, 12 females. And the age range that's taking off is the 25 to 34 range, with coming up second is a 45 plus, and that's a big category. They've led the categories in the last 2 years, and 13 in the 35 to 44 category. And you see the pie chart of what drugs have prevalent in the city of Annapolis. Next slide, please. So,
Simmons, I apologize. Could you hop back to the quality of the various drugs?
And what is that blue? What is that blue saying? 'Cause I can't see it. It says heroin.
The blue pie chart is heroin.
Heroin, opioids of 31, right? Is that what it's saying?
Yes.
So basically, this is overwhelmingly opioids. Is that in trending with other years? Like, do we have some years where it's more amphetamines or other types of narcotics, or it's opioids and heroin? That's our big.
Yeah. We have some old school heroin users, and part of what's taking them out is that, you know, as a filler, they have this new filler, and that police might be able. It's called siloncine. It's siloncine, something like that, and they use it as a filler, just like they lay stuff with fentanyl and that's what was taking folks out.
Mm-hmm.
And they're lacing stuff with fentanyl, marijuana, crack cocaine. Everything's being laced with fentanyl.
That's right. That's right.
So what the police may want to comment on this. So what the Mexican cartels have done is they bring over the scientists and the chemists from China and get them situated here, and then they roll out fentanyl.
That's right. You're absolutely right, Kevin. That's correct. That's the nexus for the fentanyl pandemic. It originated in China. It's like a synthetic opioid. It's just crazy. It's like putting the most lethal chemicals in your body, and in its purest form, a drop the size of a mustard seed can literally be fatal. It doesn't take very much, and you don't have to have direct contact with it in its purest form. And just to give you an idea of what's out on the street and what accounts for such a high overdose rate throughout America, not just the city of Annapolis or Anne Arundel County, but everywhere.
If you, Kevin, if you remember, and Chief, the last overdose, that fatal overdose that we had, I think it was a Hispanic male. He actually was smoking marijuana, but the marijuana may have been laced with some sort of opioid or fentanyl. But when you think of these things, it's not necessarily someone shooting in the arm or some method like that. It could be any drug that's laced with it that would do the overdose.
Right. That's exactly right.
And you can see the value of the fentanyl strips. Next slide, please.
If you could go ahead to the next slide. I'm just saying this in just what's very interesting is the show, and they go into deep detail about opioids and opiates and what it does to the body, and even fentanyl. And so, it's very interesting as you talk about what it does to the body and how it literally could be a gram that it was less than the size of a penny could kill somebody. It just all depends on your body and, how dependent you are on that particular narcotic. But yeah.
So this is a comparison, year-to-date comparison, 2020, January 1 to April 30, 2020, and then January 1 to April the 13th, 2021. So look at where we are. We're on course to repeating what we did last time, I think even more so, because we had 5 fatals back then. Here we have 11. So you got to remember that our fatals went up from 2019, 123%, and overdoses in its totality went up about 18%. So we're on course to break our record from last year with fatal overdoses. So part of this too, I'm glad you did this presentation, because from the Public Safety Committee, I got the impression when I left there one time that the Public Safety Committee did not think that we worked together. That they didn't think that the fire department and the police department and the mayor's area, they thought that we were all kind of doing our own thing. And we do it under this umbrella, this organizational chart that you just saw, that we work together. When we get money, I don't say, well, this is going to OEM, I'll give police a little bit. We actually say, submit your programs, and the cost of your programs, we find money to fund it. So we're operating off of, right now, $35,000 in grant funding, and then the city manager was able to give us $10,000 to keep these programs going until the next fiscal year, July 1. But in reality, if you wanted to keep these things going, it'd cost about $98,000 a year to keep all of this going.
Right. That's exactly right.
And that doesn't take into the account of, we're always trying to be dynamic and trying to look out for the next next thing. So we revamped these programs. The case in point is the police department. That program has changed over the years. My program has changed over the years.
Is that 98,000 for the 4 programs that you showed in the first slide under the first category, harm reduction?
That's for those programs and any supplies that we would need, or any support like Toller's program, NAPTOWN, anti-dope. Okay, they do a lot of stuff. They have to go out and they get people in. They do DJs before the pandemic and all that, and it was an event. You know, all that stuff costs money, and it would be in the and a lot of the core funding comes to the Office of Emergency Management. So if you need anything outside of what you put in for when you put your program on the table, then we'll find money in our budget to support it.
Is that about, you know, looking at other jurisdictions, you know, and it doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but 98,000, I was expecting more. That just doesn't seem like a lot of, like, should we be putting more money into it so that we can maybe get more resources? Is that the issue? Maybe we're not investing enough into it? Is it for a jurisdiction or for an area our size, would a similar jurisdiction spend about the same amount of money?
I don't know the particulars and the dynamics of anybody else, but we're 7 square miles, right? We're 40,000 people. And I think that's about right. You know, when I apply for these grants, the one mistake that you can do when you apply for grants is to pad it. You know, and people that are evaluating whether to give you the money, they said, no, this doesn't seem right. You know, basically I go on the data and I tout the success of the programs and I put it in, and then they evaluate it on those merits.
Okay. Alderwoman Tierney?
Thank you. I guess I think I know the answer from Director Simmons, but to police and fire, can you speak to how this has shifted your resources, just generally speaking, and how it's impacted? I mean, I know you'll get into this in the Finance Committee, but just basically, this is a huge wave for you to address. So can you speak to how it affected your allocation of resources and what the future holds?
Well, for me, the question is a very good question, but a very complex one to answer, because there's so many consequences of that. You know, at the root of most of our violent crime is due to the opioid crisis, the behaviors that result from it. It's other things too. As you know, I've been saying since I've been in Annapolis that we have to take a social approach to include a medical approach in order to really put a dent in this, and that first responders and public safety can't do it alone. We just don't have the bandwidth, the staff, or the expertise. And so a lot of this behavior that we see, even the people who don't OD are being driven by the drug trade. A lot of these, this violence, this rage that we see, once we get them incarcerated, many of them will admit to the fact that they are drug dependent, you know, alcohol dependent sometimes too. And so as a result, we're seeing things that we compartmentalize in other areas of the department that's directly related to drug abuse, and primarily this opioid crisis that we're in. So I don't know whether Chief O'Malley has any thing to add to that, but I'm sure that his first responders, particularly his EMTs, see a lot of that behavior too, the violence and the residual effects of that violence, an offspin of that. I mean, everything from these mostly guys, in fact, it's been all guys since I've been in Annapolis, these trigger pullers these homicide suspects, this fascination with guns. A lot of it's rooted into the sale and distribution of drugs. And then a lot of these guys who use these guns are high when they do it. They're under the influence of a lot of these substances. And it gets back to what Chief Simmons talked about with this cyclobenzaprine. It's a painkiller, and the cyclobenzaprine, when you mix it with heroin, it kind of makes you go mad. It's heroin is of course a Schedule 1, meaning according to the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration, it has no medicinal use whatsoever. A Schedule 1 drug. And then you go up the higher the schedule, it has some use. So Schedule 2 has some medicinal use, and so forth and so on. But then you mix it with cyclobenzaprine, which is a painkiller that can only be legally obtained by virtue of prescription. And you mix that with heroin, not only is it deadly, but it really alters the person's mind. It causes a behavior. It's a lot of side effects. If you look up cyclobenzaprine, it's dizziness and a whole lot of other stuff, but it also alters your mind. And so that's what we're dealing with. Most major U.S. cities are dealing with it. We're blessed in that we still have it manageable. We're not Baltimore City where it's not manageable. So I don't know if there's anything anybody else want to add to that.
Chief, really quickly, is the cyclobenza? I couldn't. You said it was cyclobenzaprine, or
yeah, it's cyclobenzaprine. Yeah, it's a painkiller. Mm-hmm.
Like the street name is like a benzio or a benzio. Is that the same thing I'm thinking of?
I know what you're talking about. I don't think they're the same. I'm no drug expert, but I think about benzos. They were calling them benzos when I was in high school. I think that's more like a psychedelic drug, like an hallucinogen. Of course, cyclobenzaprine and heroin both are narcotics. And of course, at the root of a narcotic, comes from the Greek word narco, like narcolepsy that makes you sleep. It's a downer. It makes an individual, kind of lethargic. But then you mix it with this cyclobenzaprine, and it just alters your mind, And a lot of these guys are mixing that along with fentanyl. This gives you just this, and that's the problem with fentanyl. To be honest with you, with these drugs laced with fentanyl, people experience such a euphoric high. And I think Chief O'Malley can really speak to this. Sometimes they get mad at you when you administer Narcan. And they're on the brink of death, and they'll jump up and get angry with you because you blew their high. That's how euphoric and that many of them have stated that they were in when they took this, and that's why it's so popular. It's just a sad state of affairs, all the way around.
Again, I'm gonna add to that, to Alderman Tierney's question about resources. Of course, we want to make sure that we treat drug addiction as a health issue. But with drug addiction come other issues and other crimes. So, oftentimes people think drug addiction is one of those things where it stands alone. But, when you start talking about robberies, thefts, burglaries, car thefts, things like that, what we try to get at is the core street distribution. And that's where our challenge comes in at. In the climate that we're in, what we try to do is work off the intelligence that we have, such as informants, information from the community, the cameras and things like that. What we don't want, being that we're in the climate that we're in, is officers out doing street level enforcement by engaging people constantly, on the corners. That can turn into something a little deadly. So it takes more time to do some of these enforcement things by working off of the intelligence that we have. So to that degree, it kind of stretches the resources to try not to get into a situation where we have officers violating people's rights, or they think something's going on that's not going on. we got to use those intelligent resources to try to get to the core of it.
Yeah, because, and I'll add one thing real quickly. And to Stan's point, our philosophy is that we want to treat addicts just what they are. It is as a disease. We're not interested in the addicts at all. What I'm interested in as the police chief are these white shirts that don't use and know full well that the poison that they're placing into the community is going to cause death and destruction, ruin lives. But they're not the ones who are getting high. They're just making the money off of it. And so to your question, Alderwoman, that takes a lot of resources. We try to partner with as many federal partners. That's why I wanted a representative from the Annapolis PD to be on the federal task force so they can learn as much as possible about how drugs are sold, manufactured, and distributed. But yes, ma'am, we don't have the resources that I think we should have, or I would like to have, to go after those people. And as Stan said, that's can be very expensive. You have to pay confidential informants pretty large sums of money to get the intelligence and the information that you need to interdict, like was done with the 44 pounds of heroin a couple of weeks ago that was coming down the Chesapeake Bay. That requires some hefty intelligence. $1 million worth of drugs to know that it's coming in. That takes a lot of money and effort and resources to investigate, to interdict that. And that's what we don't have to my liking. Yeah. Although I think we have some brilliant investigators in the Annapolis Police Department that do a hell of a job. And so if any criminals are watching this broadcast, we're still going to come after you with a high degree of success. But we would love to have more resources. Yeah. Not to go after street so much addicts, but to go after the people who are putting this poison in our community.
Yeah, it's challenging because your resources should match, well, should match, I guess is the word, the damage. But the damage is unquantifiable. It's exponential and unquantifiable. So it's a challenge. So thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions from the committee? No? Okay. Sorry, my apologies, Director Sim.
So the takeaway today is that, we're working very, very hard. This is an immense problem. We're working with limited resources and funding. We're making it work. We're responding together. This is not the fire department doing what they feel that they need to do, or the police department working over here on the right, and I'm coming up the middle. And the only person that's not here that maybe should be here is the mayor's office in Tola. And we're all working together. And as you can see by that organizational structure, it's a holistic approach. We deal with the prevention, we deal with the enforcement, we deal with the harm reduction, we deal with the treatment, all the way to the quality of life. But it's a monumental task. It's a monumental task.
Any questions or concerns from our guest or from the committee at all? Okay, this was great. I did learn one new thing. Narc is the Greek word for, what'd you say, Chief? Narc? What is
yeah, really, literally the word narcotic. A narcotic is a downer. It comes from the Greek word, like narcolepsy. When somebody has a sleeping order, they suffer from narcolepsy. They fall asleep. So the word with narco means sleep. That's why certain like Advil and what's that other one, NyQuil and all those. If you look on the label, it says a narcotic, and it is a narcotic. Anything that helps you to sleep, a downer, is a narcotic. Narco, Greek word which means sleep. I'm a former professor, so I'll never. That always comes out.
I figured, the way you just threw it in there, I was like, that must be from his teaching.
Yes, sir. It sure is.
This was good, though. I'm glad that the public and the committee just were able to get caught up on some of the things that were taking place, and it helped put some stuff into perspective for me too. And so if there are no further comments, I think we can just move on to the next item on our agenda. That's it. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Anything
one last thing, and you were correct, Alderman. Benzos, you're right. It is a form of that word. So to your point, you were right.
Okay, yeah. I'm like, I know I've heard that name before. Yeah, like for benzene. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so any other, we all good? Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn? Oh, I'm sorry, Chief O'Malley.
Can I just add to Alderwoman Tierney's question about our staffing? When it comes to these calls, our goal is to keep people breathing, keep their hearts beating. Our current staffing levels, we're able to address this because we handle the first call first, and we have a robust mutual aid agreement with Anne Arundel County and the Naval Academy. So we share resources all day long. So we can continue to move forward, and we handle that first call that comes in. But for when somebody's not breathing and their heart's not beating, we need at least 6 people on that call to keep them alive. So those resources, that's right off the bat where we need at least 6 EMTs and medics there. I do have concerns that our level of medics is falling behind where we want to be. So as we continue to fill our vacancies, we're going to fill them with the paramedic positions to get where we are. But what we are seeing is we're not just running single overdoses. We're running calls where there's at least 2 people down at one time. So now we've got to maybe not totally double that amount of equipment, but we got to send at least 2 paramedic units with that engine company and all. So it is continuing to be an issue for us. How many of those do you get a day, those calls? So it varies. It does vary, but we run overdoses every day. Sometimes they're not even reported as overdoses, but we do. And I can tell you over the weekend, and it was not in our jurisdiction, it was just outside our jurisdiction, but they had three juveniles or teenagers that were not breathing. And that took a lot of resources, and all those survived. I can tell you that we have brought a lot of people back to life that were not breathing and their hearts weren't beating, that were overdoses. And when we get there, we want to continue to breathe for them as the Narcan kicks in. It's just a matter of hopefully we get there in enough time that we can do that for them. I tell you, I'm a city girl, but we moved to Park Place, and so I'm on Taylor Avenue, and I see you're from your station at Taylor Avenue. I mean, they're EMTs. There's just a lot of calls. It's amazing. And the good thing for us in the city is, as you know, we're a Class 1 fire department, and there's a lot that goes into that. But our response times, because of our staffing levels, our response times are excellent. We are above the national standard, and we can get a medic on scene within 4 minutes as an average in the city of Annapolis. And the national standard is 8 minutes. So, we get them there quick. And sometimes we have medics on the fire engines because as they promote, some of our officers that were medics are now paramedics that are the supervisors. So they're actually on the fire engines also. And we have EMTs on the fire engine that can give the Narcan and do basic life-saving procedures. So we get people there quick, and the police are out there every day giving Narcan also. They've administered Narcan before we get on the scene quite a bit along with the community. So yeah, it's an overall community effort to address this. Yeah, I'm falling asleep to the sound of sirens. I used to do that in DC. It's not funny.
Quick question regarding that last point. How many, so if it takes 6 people, that's 2 ambulances, right?
So when we get a cardiac arrest, we'll send a fire engine, which will have a minimum of 3 people on it, a medic unit, which has a minimum of 2 people on it, and the EMS supervisor. So there's your 6. A lot of times we get asked, why is there a fire engine on a medical call? Well, it's because of that. It's because it takes that. If somebody's in cardiac arrest, plus we work a cardiac arrest for 20 minutes on the scene to try to bring them back to life, because that's protocol now. So we actually work them there. We don't just load them up in the ambulance and go. We have the capabilities of doing all the life-saving techniques the same that they would get as we got them to the hospital for that aspect of it. So that's where your 6 people come from. And that's why there's a fire engine on the call, but we get it all the time. But to add to that, when the fire engine goes, all of them are EMTs or above. And typically when people get sick or injured, they don't get sick and injured on the first floor. They'll be on the second floor, and they'll be in a small area. And just to get them out of that, it takes people. 2 people can't do it anymore. So any medical call you have, very, very seldom will you just see a medic unit there. And typically it's going to take 5 people on a standard medical call, but any critical call, you need at least 6.
Wow. And to that point, even with the police department, on any given shift, we have 6, maybe 7 officers. So if you get 2 overdoses that require police response, that leave about 5 officers remaining for the entire city. So it's a delicate dance.
Yeah, and I'm asking them to cover car shows at City Dock. That's what I mean.
And look, I don't mean to be funny here, but I tell the chief this all the time. I go down to Chick-fil-A to go get a sandwich, and when I walk into that 3,000 square foot building, they literally have more people in there making sure that you get your sandwich and salad than we have police officers on the street handling all these issues. I mean, it's crazy that. So I'll just say that as a comparison.
Gypsy,
I mean, we deal with life and death issues.
Well, you're right. I was riding. One other quick thing. Saturday, I was riding the city. Saturday night, something in my gut said, go to Annapolis and ride the city. And that's what I did Saturday night. And they had some, looked like some people partying down on Main Street. And they had some of my officers down there. And Stan will tell you, what did I do, Stan? I called you and said, we need to get them up to Robinwood and, Harbor House in Newtown. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's a nuisance downtown when people have too many beers and they are staggering and the business owners get frustrated because now they're sitting on the curb and don't want to get up. But I said, we can't have all our resources downtown, trying to pick up somebody who had too much beer. That is important. I don't want anybody to misunderstand me. That's important. But I didn't want, I drove up to Tyler Avenue and I saw about 100 people out. And I said, we got to make a presence there. So I cut my lights on just to let them know the police are here in case, because my car was unmarked. But I cut the lights on to say the police are here because I wanted to let them know in case anybody has a gun in their waistband and thought about shooting it, then we're not all downtown. So to Stan's point, we do that all the time with our resources. We just have to make the most out of them. And, I'm not belly aching. That's just the times that we're living in and the financial constraints that we're under as a result of this pandemic and other things. But we do our best to make it work.
Yes, you do.
Any other questions or comments? All right, this was good from the public safety team. Very, very, very helpful. And we will see you first thing in the morning too for the budget. Any questions from the committee so we can make a motion to adjourn? All good. Takia, is everything good? We don't have, okay. All right. Make a motion to adjourn. Someone, please.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Good night.
I will see you guys later. Be safe.